Today, it's great to be interviewing Paul Polman, who's Chief Executive of Unilever. Paul started his career with Procter & Gamble and spent 27 years there. Moved on to Nestle, where he was CFO, and then joined Unilever in 2009 as Chief Executive. And he's the champion of the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. So, Paul, I've heard you speak on a couple of occasions, and you often come out with some really significant sort of reality check statistics that people in business need to think about in relation to what's going on in the world out there. Can you perhaps give us a couple of those now to make people start thinking?
Well, it's what is very important that people need to realize, and in essence they do, but then how do you act on it? But what people need to realize is that the current system that we have developed has served us very well, but hasn't served everybody. I think the crisis of 2007, 2008 has shown that the economic growth, which had lifted a lot of people out of poverty, came at an enormous cost of government debt or private debt, which we're still catching up from, of overconsumption in some parts of the world, and frankly leaving many people behind. And increasingly we see the effects of that. We see the planetary boundaries being challenged. Climate change is a good example. Overconsumption, certainly a big cause of that. We see the financial crisis that has spilled over into economic crises, impossibility to do job creation, inequality going up, and we obviously see the effect of leaving too many people behind. The European refugee crisis is an important example of that. So my spiel or my vision is clearly that business, which is after all about 60% of the global economy, comes from the private sector. 80% of the financing, 90% of the job creation right now. Business can simply not be a bystander in a system that gives them life in the first place. So in order for societies to function long term, which you'd think ought to be in the interest of the business community as well, we also need to be active participants in changing that system in the first place that has given us these results. And it sounds to me that that is also what society expects. If you look at the average citizen in this world right now, they would say trust in business is fairly low. Yeah. And we need to, as a result, evolve our business models. Most businesses still operate, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but most businesses still operate with trying to stay on the right side of the law. And that's probably 95% of the businesses. Let's not get caught mentality. Then some earn so much money that they feel a little guilty, so they become more philanthropical. Others say, I can do more with that money, so cost-related marketing came in. Then someone invented CSR. What's, again, it's usually someone close to retirement. It's one part of the business, and page number 2 of the annual report. Then Michael Porter came in with what I call the fourth level, which is shared value creation. Frankly, a dangerous concept, well intended, but like if you buy my products, then I create jobs. I make you happy because you find my product worth more than the money that you pay me. So it's a shared value. It's very quickly justified, in my opinion. I'm in level 5, which I think every company needs to move to. That the issues of food security, of unemployment, of climate change, of inequality are of such proportions that every business needs to show that they're actually making a positive contribution to solving that. If you can show that you are not less bad, but that you're actually positive, you'll be embraced by society and you'll have a long and bright future. It's not easy to do, but it's possible. For that reason, we said in Unilever, we decouple our growth from environmental impact. We're not going to be more of a burden to the planetary boundaries. And at the same time, we increase our overall social impact. Now, if you build a long-term responsible, sustainable model, it should also be to the benefit of your other stakeholders, including the long-term shareholders that are interested into the benefit of this company. If you keep a very quarterly or short-term mentality, you'll never attack these issues, which require longer-term solutions. And I think you'll never create a business model that will be long-term sustainable either.
Now, and one of the things you alluded to there is quite interesting, because I think it's fair to say, I get the impression that there are organizations out there that want to be seen as being sustainable, and they are doing so as a tick box exercise to maintain their brand within the market. What's your view on that in terms of the sort of numbers of organisations that are really embracing this and those that are looking at it as a PR brand tick box exercise?
Yeah, and you find them in all camps necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you can understand, I'm not going to defend one or the other.
No.
The trick is actually to get more in the right camp and then create these tipping points.
Yeah.
You need to be very relaxed about that, because sometimes the behavior of some companies or people or other organizations for that matter is because they might not be aware, they might have different constraints. You have to be very mindful about that. So I'm always fairly relaxed. The thing I really would want to point out is that we live in an age of transparency, and reputation is not being built by what people say but what people do. And increasingly you can flush out the real ones from the pretended ones, if you want to call them that way. So I think that on the positive side, the reasons for change are becoming for more and more companies fairly obvious. The effects of climate change are affecting many companies' P&Ls, and we've seen a major shift in the number of CEOs that can not only have a good discussion about climate change, but are actually starting to act on it. We have 35 trillion in the financial market calling for a price on carbon. We have 600 companies that already have an internal price on carbon. I would submit that you saw some good outcomes in the COP21 in Paris last December, because the business community was making a more convincing case that climate mitigation was needed to continue to have development and job growth, so job creation. So you see these things changing probably quicker than people realize. And in that respect, I'm more optimistic. You look at food, the food market, you take the US, for example. About 90% of the growth of the food market right now is in products that you and I would call organic or bio or green. The eating habits are changing quite rapidly, also here in the UK for that matter. Fair trade is one of the fastest growing. So you see citizens of this world changing quite quickly, and companies some of them are struggling with that, but they would be well served to stay connected with the market, otherwise they'll be voted out.
Like you, I sort of travel around the world, and it's interesting the cultural differences in terms of attitudes to obviously a number of things, but sustainability is one of them. And sometimes when you're out of Western Europe or USA, there is an attitude that says, well, hang on, you've had your economic growth, we want our economic growth, and perhaps the attitude to sustainability in some developing countries isn't necessarily as strong. I mean, what do you find in your travels?
Actually, if you find our research and our travels, the attitude is stronger in the developing market than it is actually in Europe and the US. In Europe and the US, even around climate change, because we've built our buildings of a better quality, we have the financial independence, we've put insurance activities in place, we actually have a more resilient economy and tend to see these issues farther away. If you live in India and your water level goes down every day, or you live in China, you can't breathe the air in a city, people know. They might not talk towards sustainability, but they look at the quality of life. You look at the 13th National 5-Year Plan now of China, it very much, the upcoming G20, very much has green growth and sustainability in there. Not surprisingly, you saw some of the developing markets, China included, be far more aggressive with their individual submissions, but also with their demands in the COP21 climate negotiations. What is obviously quite normal, and that's how we should not confuse it, is that these countries need help for problems indeed that we have created in other parts of the world. So that's why climate financing is important. REDD Plus on deforestation financing is important. The developed world has a financial and moral obligation to help the developing world, but the awareness in the developing world is enormously high. Now, for the developing world, it's also a matter of survival, because all the economic growth, urbanization, population expansion is actually happening in the developing world. Let me give you a very simple example of what is going to happen over the next 15 to 30 years. World population going to 9-10 billion. Currently we have 7 billion with 50% living in cities. That's 3.5 billion living in cities. World going to 9-10 billion with 70% living in cities. Means 7 billion people living in cities. So the number of people living in cities is going to double, which means that we need to construct in the next 30, 40 years as many cities as we've constructed until now in the world. Simply said, there's about every 8-9 weeks another New York is being constructed. Now all of that is being done in the developing world. For the next 15 years, that's a $90 trillion investment that is needed for that. How we are going to make these investments, climate smart, environmentally friendly, are going to decide if we're going to live for the next few hundred years. London as a city has still the infrastructure from the Roman times. So designing it right could be a tremendous competitive advantage for emerging markets. And these investments need to happen anyway. The mobile phone in China is a great example, leapfrogging the landline. So what is the mobile phone in these countries for sustainable growth, for green growth, is a very important thing. And the technology is helping us here now. We're coming to a point that solar or wind can provide energy at prices equivalent to fossil fuel, even at the low prices that we have now for fossil fuel. How you design public transport, how you design housing, mobility is going to have a big impact. And you have an opportunity to do that right and actually create a competitive advantage. So tremendously exciting for the developing markets if they buy into this and snap out of a victim mentality, which obviously you don't want to get into.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right, because one of the things I believe the West, or the majority of people in the West, Western Europe and USA completely miss, is the fact that the evidence, exactly as you have seen from Asia, from Middle East, etc., from Africa and South America, is that these economies are leapfrogging the West in terms of how they're using technology. And actually, maybe that's a wake-up call for the West.
Yeah, and because they come from a scarce resource environment, they've actually applied their circular economy concept already much more than we. We live here in a linear economy. You know, we dig in the earth, we make the packaging from it, we ship it to the people's home, and then 90% we discard into a landfill. If you go to the slums in Mumbai, you'll see that everything will be reused for something else. So the concept of circular economy actually is very well developed in these emerging markets by necessity. How can we get the economic growth and maintain that same concept of circular economy? It's very exciting. The other thing why I'm fairly confident is technology increasingly can be made available in abundance, and when it is being made available in abundance, usually it's at a lower price. Access to mobile phones is a great example, and you could move increasingly into a sharing economy. The new models like Uber or Airbnb are great examples of that at a macro level, but you see the same coming in the healthcare now very quickly, in the financial industry, and even in ours, which will be to the benefit of these emerging markets in creating these greener, more sustainable futures.
And linked to that, the fact that they are reusing, recycling, etc. All the evidence I've seen, and linking back to the sort of the entrepreneurial concept, is that there seems to be a more innate entrepreneurial thinking in the heads of everybody in the developing world, no matter what they're doing, from small shopkeepers to, I saw a lady on the road outside Calcutta, sitting there with 3 cauliflowers. You know, the ultimate example of the single entrepreneur. Did you find that they are more entrepreneurial in the way they think?
Absolutely, the statistics would support it actually. I like a lot of social entrepreneurs because also for the way I want to take this business, and I like to link them into the Unilever value chain, and we get an enormous ideas and strengths from them. And what you find actually, when I was working on the high-level panel for the Millennial Development Goals for the Secretary General, we dealt a lot with Africa, which actually has the highest percentage of youth entrepreneurs, believe it or not, with very creative solutions to solve some of their enormous challenges against odds that we wouldn't even take. So getting that creativity in companies like this, I think is very important for any company. So you definitely find that. Unfortunately, what, as they say, necessity makes you more creative. But unfortunately, the environment that these people have to operate in doesn't give them the chance to fully develop some of these initiatives. You know, you have 17 sustainable development goals. Goal number 16 is about rule of law, transparency, access to legal systems. So we need to build that into these countries. The capacity for these markets to function is very, very important. So next to encouraging these entrepreneurs, you really have to work also on the frameworks to make it possible for these people to succeed.
But so therefore, the SME and entrepreneur population is absolutely critical, because you know the moment you sort of talk to people about organizations, they immediately think of the global corporations. But you and I know that the SMEs and entrepreneurs employ vastly more people. And it's how how does the large corporation and government engage them? But that links into the agenda between large organizations and civil society. Do you think that government, the civil society, government and large organizations are at last starting to work together in an effective partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the new generation of CEOs, we talked about leadership before, but partnership is a very important part of that. We cannot solve the issues alone anymore. It was Einstein who said the definition of insanity is do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So we are at this point that we really need to step change, become adults, as I call it, and start working differently together. That's why the trust element is so important of that. The element of transparency is important of that. The element of being longer term is important of that. And the element of future leaders being more systemic thinkers to understand these complexities in the world, food, energy, water, and being able to distill that to simple projects and actions to make them come alive. But to get the real breakthroughs in the world now, be it in terms of creating employment, equity, food security, etc., you definitely need to work in partnership. And what you now see is that most of the major projects that we have in Unilever, around our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, be it creating a few 100,000 more tea smallholder farmer jobs, or doing the hand washing programs in the developing countries against infectious diseases, or providing people with clean drinking water, that there is the 2.5 billion part of the neglected on the bottom of the pyramid, as C.K. Prala used to call it, that you can't get through alone. So together with DFID or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Clinton Global Initiative, USAID, we are forming these tripartisan partnerships, and they work best. The great example of that is in deforestation. 60% of the deforestation is because of the demand for food. It's about 16% there alone of global warming. So we have a serious issue. The forests of the world are the lungs of this world, and if we keep destroying them at the pace we're now doing, we're going to be extinct once more itself. So we've always taken the point of view that if you're in the food business, you have to take responsibility of issues in the total value chain. This is a clear issue. But in order to solve it around palm oil or soy or beef or pulp or paper or other prime materials, you have to work together. You have to work it at an industry level as a starting point. You have to work it with governments, with global financial institutions like the World Bank. And if you put these coalitions in place, you actually find, interestingly enough, that what I call the rule of 30, it only needs about 20, 30 of the right people to create these tipping points to really have impact at scale at a global level that is meaningful. We are now having 90% of the palm oil that is exported sustainably certified. And that's because of these coalitions that have come up there. We do the same with food in Africa, which cannot feed itself. We've created the new Vision for Agriculture or the Grow Africa projects, where industry comes together with the governments and NGO community, all of them important, civil society. And that's why the WEF, the World Economic Forum in Davos, is such an ideal forum, because that's where you can really meet in a non-threatening environment and build that trust and hopefully create these projects.
And all the stakeholders are there. So if that's the sort of macro perspective, I think one of the things about this interview is that some of the people sort of listening to it who aren't chief executives, who aren't on the board of global corporations, are saying, well, you know, what can I do about it? But going to your 20% tipping point comment, I think there's an argument that says that in any organization, if you get to the point where 20% of people are seriously concerned about this agenda and want to do something, they can. So for the leader who's at mid-level or junior level, what would your advice to them be about, you might not be in charge of the organization, but you can at least do something around this agenda? What would you say?
So everybody has that challenge. I'm not in charge of the world either, or I'm not running Europe either. So how do you influence that? So anybody that's a great leader influences his or her circle of influence. And by doing that so positively, undoubtedly will expand that circle of influence at whatever level. You take Unilever, we have about over 100,000 companies tied into our value chain, small and big companies. They benefit enormously from some things we do. When we transform markets, like for example, we move all of our ice cream cabinets together with Nestle and Coke and Pepsi to natural refrigerants, the small ones will benefit from that as well. So the starting point for everybody is to make a personal commitment, to pick up some books, be aware of it, talk to your neighbors, because most likely you'll figure out what you can do. I don't deserve a seat at the table, even as a CEO in this company, if I don't turn off the lights in my own house, if I don't look at the lowest carbon transport that I can find, if I don't put solar panels on my roof, or be sure that my windows don't leak. So I've made my house carbon neutral here in London, and it's absolutely possible. You might not find it financially responsible, but I wanted to make the point. You have to live what you preach. And then obviously, find your area of passion, wherever it is. And once you know what the main issues are that you're passionate about, undoubtedly within your circle of influence, you'll start to grow. So that's true for everybody.
Yeah. So therefore, the advice for I suppose, for the young developing leader is actually, yes, you're trying to go forward in your career, but maybe stop looking inside all the time, but look outside as well.
You know, I don't know about you, but I've been working now for nearly 35 years. Nobody has ever stopped me to do something that's morally right. And I don't think that would ever happen. And if that would happen, I'd leave that company. But fortunately, I have not been in that challenge. So I think at the end of the day, most people think themselves, I cannot do this, I cannot do that. They have to look in the mirror before they start to blame the environment around them. The real leaders are the ones that don't get bothered by that say, wherever I am, if I am in this, I was in Ecuador over the holidays. If I run this small office in Ecuador, I'm making it carbon neutral. I'm going to see that there is no waste. I have a project to ensure that we use less water or electricity, that the printer uses less copies. Often these projects are actually closely linked with savings at the same time, but it's actually fun to do because it's linked to a higher purpose. We have the issue of food security, 800 million people going to bed hungry, whilst we're able to waste 30–40% of the food in the world. It's a criminal story. There's no other answer for that, and we're unwilling to attack it. Most companies have savings programs because every year the profit needs to be up. It's not motivating to just have a savings program. I've had that every year that I worked and when I moved up. So, but in our company, we don't waste food, or we try not to waste food, because people are going to bed hungry. And you can see what energy that brings, even from our individual smallholder farmers who are small entrepreneurs. We have a few million that are dedicated to our value chain. They are entrepreneurs. They are so passionate about the purpose of fighting the issues of food security that they are attacking the food waste. Now, a byproduct of that is that we are running the business more efficiently. But bring it to this higher purpose and you'll see what people are capable of doing in anything, whatever you decide to focus on.
I think the higher purpose everybody gets. I think the problem is that many people think they don't have the power to do anything. But from what you've said and what I know, everybody has the power to do something and make a difference to themselves and others.
The biggest power we all have, we call it here small actions, big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
The biggest power we all have is the power of our wallet and the power of our behavior. The behavior influencing others around us, without any doubt, and the wallet is your decision power. Companies like ours depend fully on the individual person's decisions of all the millions of people, billions of people out there. And you can decide by yourself, and I do, you can decide if you have money where you invest in, which companies you buy shares of. You can go to a store and decide which company you buy your products of. Now you might say, yeah, but it's too much work and I don't know. You know, with the internet now, there's a lot possible. And if you have the one-on-one conversations with people, you can often see that that changes can be made at a relatively low hurdle that have tremendous influence. And if you can scale that up, you can change the world. I firmly believe that for each of our brands, my vision is very simple, that each of our brands we have, be it Lifebuoy or be it Dove or be it Knorr or Polman's, I want to create a movement of people. There's about 1 billion people connected to these brands. It's possible now with the mobile phone and everything, that are then movements for change. So how do we change the practices in the tea industry? How do we get to sustainable tea? How do we ensure that Dove becomes a movement for women's self-esteem so that we have equal rights and opportunities? That Lifebuoy becomes a movement of no child being left behind and everybody reaching the age of 5. So creating these connections now is possible. And individuals do that. In fact, many of the movements that are happening today started with an individual.
Absolutely.
You know, Rosa Parks had no power, she had no money. She just refused to stand up in a bus. And she changed the face of racial segregation in the US. And that is true for many others I could mention. So we all are empowered to do that. We're empowered, not perhaps by sometimes the people around us, but there are others that have put us here on Earth, and I would be ashamed not to use that.
And with some inspiration and truth, we can change the world.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all capable of doing that. Unfortunately, we have enough people that think that way. That gives me hope for the future.
Indeed it does. Thank you very much indeed, Paul. That was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.